Okay, so it's 2:05. We will start this webinar. Can somebody from the audience please confirm if the voice and the sound is clear to you? You can use the chat box to communicate with us. Okay, all right, thanks a lot. Okay, so we're gonna start the webinar. Once again, thanks a lot to those who have made time for this webinar. I think this is a very interesting topic for us to explore given the current phase of Islamic finance. Just as a brief introduction about Ethis and also about this series of webinar. So Ethis is a financial technology company. We started back in 2014 in Singapore. What we do is basically crowdfunding. We are involved in two types of crowdfunding. One is called charity crowdfunding, and the second is investment crowdfunding. Charity crowdfunding is straightforward. We have globalsadaqah.com, in which we have campaigns or projects listed by credible institutions and NGOs for us to find people who are interested to basically help in terms of fulfilling their specific needs. On the other hand, we have the investment crowdfunding. In investment crowdfunding, we have two types of crowdfundings happening there. One is peer-to-peer crowdfunding, and this is done by our company in Indonesia, which got licensed by the Securities Commission in Indonesia called OJK. And the second type is equity crowdfunding, whereby the company was licensed by the Securities Commission in Malaysia to carry on the activities of a regulated market operator. Right? So we have these series of webinar in the last Wednesday of every month. This month specifically, we're going to talk about a very important topic in the Islamic finance industry, which has recently been discussed in a lot of conferences and also articles and so on. Right? So we have a very good speaker with us, who I don't think we can find somebody better than Dr. Hassan to talk about this specific topic. We are going to speak about the Sharia compliance and Sharia-based. What is the difference? What are the challenges that the practitioners face? So I will not be taking much of the audience's time. Just a brief introduction about Dr. Hassan. Dr. Hassan is the CEO of Salihin Advisory. He is also a trainer in terms of Islamic finance certification. He's also a professor. At the same time, he's an advisor in few Islamic financial institutions. So I think without further ado, I would like to pass the stage to Dr. Hassan. Then from there we can continue. So just before that, Dr. Hassan, the flow of this webinar will be the first 30 to 40 minutes will be dedicated for a presentation by Dr. Hassan. After that, we have questions that we already received from you. And after the questions that we have already received, we will be getting a second batch of questions live from the audience in this webinar. Dr. Hassan?
Thank you very much, brother. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wa salatu wa salam ala Rasulil Kareem. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon. First of all, I would like to express my thanks and appreciation to Ethis Ventures for this opportunity to conduct this webinar on a quite important and interesting topic, talking about Sharia compliance versus Sharia-based in the context of Islamic finance operation. Let me maybe start by talking about, this is number one, if you look at the slide, this is some of the area that we cover, and also this is the key aspect that we are going to also point it out and highlight. So let me start basically the discussion by saying whether there is a need in the first place to distinguish between the two terminology. Calling this product as a Sharia-based or calling it as a Sharia compliance, what's the impact, whether that one is significant or not.
I'm asking him.
In the view of some experts, basically,
is he not presenting
the slides? The slides.
The issue is not that
there's no slide.
Basically, there is no difference between product being Sharia-based or Sharia compliance. Because at the end of the day, the bottom line is that the product is accepted within the financial institutions after the Sharia board approved the product to be offered as part of product and services. So whether we call it Sharia compliance or we call it Sharia the result is that the product is permissible to be used. The product is permissible to be offered in the market, whether you call it Sharia-based or Sharia-compliant. Here we look basically at the form and substance, and I may give some examples basically talking about this kind of terminology use in a various Sharia contract. If I may take, for example, Mudaraba. Mudaraba, as you know, sometimes scholars call it Mudaraba. Of course, this is the language of Iraq, and we call it also Muqaraba. So we can use the contract and name it by using different terminology. Mudaraba, Muqaraba, Qirad, Muamala. All terms in its forms are different, but they meet in the substance. So they mean the Mudaraba that you know, capital providers with basically Mudarib to invest and share the profit, and in case of losses, it will be borne entirely by the capital provider. So substance is the same, but how we describe this contract, sometimes you call it Mudaraba, sometimes you call it Muqarada, sometimes you call it Qirad, sometimes you call it Muamala. So difference in the descriptions, difference in the form, but substance is the same. Mudaraba is coming from Darbu fil ard, traveling, and basically Qirad is coming from cutting part of the capital to be invested. And it goes like this. Same example for Salam. Some school of law, they call it Salam. Other school of law, they call it Salaf, but substance is the same. Talking about the future contract, advancing the capital, for a future delivery of a commodity. Same example of, for example, the auctions. We call it Bay'ul Muzayada, we call it Bay'ul Mahawij, we call it Bay'ul Mafalis, we call it Bay'ul Man Kasadat Bida'atuh. These are Arabic terms which are different in the form, but they meet in substance and they describe the same Sharia contract. So the point here is that sometimes we use a different terminology, different descriptions in the form, but we mean the same substance, similar to the example we give. If we want to go for maybe an academic discussion, so we're trying to distinguish between the two terms. So we can basically say that Sharia-based is a contract that basically, or a product based on the Sharia, which is founded upon Sharia. So if I put it in a different, a very simple language, it's like a local product and imported product. Local product is made, for example, locally here and sold locally. And imported product, basically you import from overseas and you sell it locally. After basically you get all the clearance, customs, taxations, and so on and so forth. So it's saying Sharia-based is a kind of product which is built upon Sharia, which has its terminology, natures within the Sharia framework and Islamic law, and it has been discussed throughout the books of fiqh and also referred throughout the centuries. So example, Ijara. Ijara is one of the examples. يا أبت استأجره إن خير من استأجرت القوي. It has been mentioned in the Quran al-Kareem, and the Prophet ﷺ أعطوا الأجير حقه قبل أن يجف عرقه. So the contract of Ijara has been mentioned in the Quran and the Sunnah, like Mudaraba, Musharaka, Wadi, and other contracts. These contracts have been mentioned by name, so this is why one of the classifications of Sharia, we call it name contract and unnamed contract. So the name contract that has been basically spelled out and mentioned by Sharia and basically have been discussed throughout the different school of law. On the other hand, we have the Sharia compliance. Sharia compliance is like a product imported from overseas. In our example, it is imported from the conventional finance, conventional banking, and conventional space, and went into a process of screening and revisions, of course, by eliminating the Sharia non-compliance with the prohibited instruments, and offer it accordingly by the Islamic financial institutions. So we see it is a kind of an Islamization process of the conventional product. So a product like Ijara is basically, if I give an example of this by the Sharika or Musharaka, so we have, for example, Sharikatul Inan, we have Sharikatul Mufawala, we have, for example, this kind of Sharika in Islamic law under the contract of Musharaka. Then we have, for example, stock company. Stock company is listed in the Sharika as well. If you look at the IFRS standards, they will start with the highlighting and mentioning some types of Sharika from a traditional perspective, which are basically Sharia-based contract like Sharikatul Mufawada, Sharikatul Inan. And they will talk about a new adopted form of contract like stock company and others, limited liability companies, and so on and so forth. So you can see the combination in the same standard of IFRS between what's called Sharia-based structures company and Sharia compliance structural company. But at the end of the day, whether we call it Sharia-based, meaning it has a foundations and its origin and features from Sharia, or it is a Sharia compliance that has been important from a conventional space because of its relevancy, needs, importance, but went into a process of screening by eliminating the non-Sharia compliance elements and ensuring it's a proper consistency with the Sharia rules and value. So this is one I'd like to highlight. I just re-emphasize again by sharing Sharia-based product basic is derived from Sharia law. Even it has similarity in the conventional finance like Ijara. Ijara is a contract where it has its content and operation in the conventional finance as well, because we have lease, wakala, it doesn't exist in the conventional space also. Sometimes it does exist here, but normally we realize a contract or product which has not basically its origin initially. So that's number one. Which just a point that may have an impact on the product being Sharia compliance is the decision of the Sharia board. When you look at the Sharia board within the financial system, it represents the ultimate decision to validate the product in order to offer it in the market. So basically, if the Sharia board accepts the product, so regardless of whether we call it Sharia-based or Sharia compliance, so it will be offered by the institution. And if the decision is Sharia board to get the product, so basically it will not be offered to the market by the financial institution, whether you call it Sharia-based or Sharia compliance. But if you want to try to line up which one is important, of course, in the context of the Islamic finance operations, so there are two events. Possibly, Sharia, even also Sharia-based product, it requires some components of compliance. I'll just give an example of that. So what I'm trying to say is, doesn't mean Sharia-based, there is no compliance requirement. So even though it's Sharia-based, there is no requirement. So give an example. Murabah is a Sharia case, but there are some requirements of Murabah and to be offered by the financial institution, some terms and conditions to be looked at. And this Sharia, meaning there are conditions. No, it's valid. It doesn't mean Sharia is ignore the requirements of compliance. So, costs, clause, margins, so the point which are Sharia, but there are also Sharia required in order to validate the product. Those compliances as well. And if those comply with those conditions, you may return the product which is or not for example, Sharia-based contract. Now, if you put it in English, that's the Mudaraba will be part of the capital in the ventures of Mudaraba. It will not be a Mudaraba compliance. If the capital provider impose guarantee element on Mudarib, it's become a Sharia compliance contract. If the agreements on the profit ratio in a lump sum amount, it will be a non-Sharia compliance contract because it should be based on the ratio agreed upon, based on agreed ratio 70, 30, and so on and so forth, but cannot be lump sum amount like 10,000 and 20,000 and so on and so forth. So what I'm trying to say here is that even though there is a Sharia-based product, but there is another features or elements or conditions. Sometimes we call it terms and conditions, sometimes we call it principal terms and conditions. And in the Sharia language, we call it shurut al-aqd. And broadly speaking, we call it shurut jaliyah and shurut Sharia. Shurut Sharia means conditions imposed by Sharia, and shurut jaliyah conditions imposed, agreed upon by the contracting party, which make the Sharia compliance more broader in terms of concept, meaning it is more wider in terms of scope, and it is embedded even in the Sharia-based, because some people may think though Sharia-based, meaning it is all the way valid subject to some requirements of compliance, as I mentioned. Because you may have a situation, as I mentioned, one product basically is a Sharia-based, but there are some terms and conditions we have to look at in order to validate it. This is why we mention here there are a line of screening. The product should pass the Sharia base first before basically granting the Sharia compliance status. And in case of diversity, it's another issue here that I would like to add it, and maybe later on also I will add a few points when it comes to the diversity. Maybe we will take it in the later on, or maybe I just highlight it now. When it comes to the diversity, or let me leave it later on when I talk about the international compliance. So we see how is the sometimes the debate even in the Sharia base. Sometimes this product or this contract is a Sharia based in one school of law, but it is not the Sharia based in the other school of law because they don't agree on its permissibility. For example, Bahrain is a Sharia-based product in the Shafi, but it is not Sharia-based product in the other school of law. Ba'ul Wafa is a Sharia-based product in the Hanafi school of law, but it is not Sharia-based product in the other school of law. Sometimes you see the diversity between what's called a view of the school of law and also the Sharia board may position the Sharia-based and Sharia compliance differently based on the position of each school of law. Again, talking about the theory and practice. So theory, as I mentioned, we can debate the issue, as I mentioned, but when it comes to practice, basically, the final say is basically the resolutions of the Sharia board that put final say to the permissibility to the product or otherwise, regardless of the debate whether it is a Sharia-based or a Sharia-based. So there is a difference between theory and practice, number one. And number two, there is a difference between the academic discussions, basically, and the discussion within the context of what's called a regulated market. In the regulated market, basically, the more importance is given to the Sharia compliance because, as I'm going to see, it is much broader because we have Sharia compliance requirement, then we have a regulatory requirements, then we have the financial institutions policy requirements. All these basically will determine the broader concept of the Sharia compliance of the product within the financial institutions. One of the issues that may create a discrepancy in the product, whether being Sharia-based or Sharia compliance, meaning that whether it is the product and the contract is originated within a financial institution or within the Sharia law, or it is imported from a conventional banking, is basically a wrong sequence in the execution. Sometimes if you have, this is area of non-Sharia compliance cases whereby you do a wrong. For example, you list out before you buy. or for example, you do murabaha before you buy before you own the asset, or for example, you do the mudaraba without agreeing on the profit distribution ratio, and so on and so forth. So the issue here, if you do a kind of sequence, so it may turn the product into discrepancy. Sometimes the wrong combination of the contract, like for example, you cannot combine between equity and daman, equity and what's so-called kafala, guarantee. So wrong combinations will turn the product into non-Sharia compliance. So for example, something that must be fixed in sale, you make it, for example, floating. Something which is floating, you make it fixed. So again, Sharia has no problem with something being fixed or otherwise, with the product being guaranteed or otherwise, but the issue is on the what's called proper matching. So you have to make sure the proper matching is there, meaning you can combine kafala and sales. You can combine guarantee and loan, but you cannot combine equity and basically guarantee. Product can be fixed like sales. Product could be floating, like for example, mudaraba and musharaka, so it is an expected rate, it cannot be fixed. And sometimes it could be fixed, both accommodate both options, like ijara, it could be fixed, it could be floating, and so on and so forth. So Sharia has no problem between from something being fixed or otherwise, but the issue is mainly on the proper matching and proper combinations. Here maybe one of the questions that we may pose in practice, which one is important, Sharia compliance or Sharia-based. I think I have mentioned it. Well, in practice, the more importance is given to the Sharia compliance because that's how is the practice, and because of the assessment, and because, as I mentioned, the requirement is not only Sharia requirements. So terms and conditions imposed by Sharia is one, terms and conditions imposed by the contracting party is two, terms and conditions imposed by the financial institution and its policy in overall is three, the regulatory requirements by the central bank or the Security Commission is four. In the case that you have a Sharia advisory council at the national level, their resolutions are binding, it makes it number five, and so on and so forth. So basically, the compliance is more relevant. This is why we have what's called Sharia compliance department, or we have a compliance department. Risk management is one department, and compliance is one department. So the compliance is a very big department because of the terms and the conditions, because of the policy that the operation or the financial institution should comply with. So it has more broader meaning and more importance to be a Sharia-based. And just to add, the importance of Sharia compliance is, of course, we are talking here about, for example, in the context of Malaysia, for those who are basically listening, Malaysia, it has the Islamic Financial Services Act, so you have to comply with it. And if I may just jump to the relevant slides. Yeah, if I will go here to the slides. So you have to comply with number one, the Islamic Financial Services Act of 2013. You have to comply with the relevant law as regulated or imposed by the Central Bank or the Security Commissions. You have to comply with the standards and the guidelines issued by regulators such as the Central Bank and the Security Commission. You have to comply with the resolutions of the Sharia Advisory Council of the Central Bank or the Security Commissions, and you have to comply with the resolution of the Sharia Committee. So as you can see here, there are five sequence requirements that the financial institutions has to observe in its operation, in the offering of product and services, and these are more compliance. That's why even though the product is a Sharia-based, but there are additional requirements that they have to look at. That's why the compliance scope is more important and more relevant when it comes to practice, despite the importance of the Sharia-based product. Now, if I put some maybe a question saying that which item that can create diversity from the five that I have highlighted just now, of course the answer, as you can see, it should be number five. Why? Because normally in practice, if I talk about Malaysia as an example, the entire industry the entire Islamic finance industry comply with the Islamic Financial Institutions Act 2013, comply with the relevant law of the country, comply with the standard guideline of the Security Security Commission, comply with the resolutions of the Sharia Advisory Council of Banking Regulator and Security Commissions. Now the diversity will take place in number 5, whereby one Sharia board, they may have a view which may differ from other Sharia board from different institutions, and here the Sharia compliance will take a different direction. In other words, what is a Sharia compliance in Bank A could not be Sharia compliance in Bank B. And what is a Sharia compliance in Bank B might not be Sharia compliance in Bank A. And why? Because of number 5, whereby the Sharia board, we have to assess, discuss, and take positions on the permissibility or otherwise of the product before it is offered to the market, especially if we are talking about the very complex situations, very complex issues where there is no direct provisions from Quran or Sunnah, there is no provisional discussion. It's a very a new emerging case where potentially the views of Sharia scholars, even within the financial institutions, within the Sharia board, you may have a different view in assessing the issue because of its complexity. So as you can see, and the debate go more, at the international level, when different institutions may take different positions based on their understanding of the case presented. So the other maybe question that I would like to engage with is how to determine the Sharia compliance within the diversity of Sharia opinions and Sharia board. Here basically, as I mentioned, the bottom line and the ultimate decision is by the Sharia board. Financial institutions is bound according to the IFRS standards, basically according also to the practice are bound to follow the Sharia resolutions of the Sharia board, because that's reflect the Sharia compliance status of the financial institution. So despite there is a debate within the financial institution or outside the financial institutions, whatever resolutions achieved by the board will reflect what's so-called the Sharia compliance status, where the and the Sharia board will be accountable for their decision. The other tricky maybe questions is the Sharia compliance officer or the Sharia auditor. When he acts, basically, on what ground he should act. Sometimes I just give you a scenario where Sharia auditor could be a Sharia scholar, Sharia compliance officer could be a researcher, could be an author, could be a writer, could be a Sharia scholar as well. And he may have different views, and he may work in a bank A, move to bank B, move to bank C, and he may have a different what's so-called thoughts, different opinions on what is practiced by its bank. So when he carry on his Sharia compliance audit or Sharia compliance review, shall he subscribe to his opinions or he has to follow the SOP? I think the message is very clear that the Sharia compliance officer or the Sharia auditor has to apply what's so-called follow up the SOP and follow the Sharia governance structures, whereby he's bound to follow the resolution of the Sharia board regardless of his opinion. If he has any different opinions, he can put it in the Facebook, he can put it in a WhatsApp, he can put it in a blog, he can write a book, but as long as he's working with the financial institution, basically, he's bound to follow basically the SOP, and one of them is basically adhering to the Sharia board resolutions, regardless whether those resolutions is inconsistent with his thoughts or otherwise. This is again on the diversity at the international level. So we have basically the IOFI, we have the diversity also would be extended as a result of the different Sharia school of law. We have the Hanafi, the Maliki, the Hanbali, and we have this has been somehow moderated, has been polished, has been somehow harmonized through the decision of the International Fiqh Academy, has been improved to the standards of what's so-called IOFI and IFSB and others, but the discrepancy definitely and the diversity still does exist because it's a phenomena within the Sharia law. It started during the Prophet ﷺ, during the companion, during the successor, during the successor of the successor, during the independent scholars, during the leading school of law, and it's carried on until today, and will carry on to the day of judgment. So it's a phenomenon within the Sharia, but here is just how to minimize the debate, how to moderate it, how to harmonize it, how to close the gap, but you cannot eliminate that because the debate exists even within one single Sharia board of one single financial institution. I think quickly coming to the end of the session, maybe I just browse through some of the issue or some of the other points. Looking at the Sharia requirements compliance, so we can look at it from overview or a macro view, a helicopter view, whereby the overall product and services should comply with the maqasid al-Sharia. So it has to be consistent with the objective of Sharia. That's the macro assessment of the product and services of the financial institutions. If any product and services goes against maqasid al-Sharia, it is a sign that something wrong with this product and services has to be relooked at. That's the first assessment. The second assessment of the compliance is the micro assessment. Micro assessment basically is looking at the formation of the contract, looking at the standard and the requirements of the contract, looking at the conditions, shurut al-aqd, to make sure it's in compliance with the Sharia law. And of course, the current trend is basically compliance with what's called the SDG, Sustainable Development Goals, consistent with the ESG, consistent with the VBI. These are new trends in the markets, especially in the context of Islamic finance, whereby we have to look beyond what's called the macro assessment, beyond the micro assessment, then we go at broad, looking at the other criteria, and moving from one single P, which is profit, to a three Ps, which is planet, profit, and prosperity for people. I think that this is the requirements. I don't think I will go through it. It's the pillars of the contract and their conditions that determine the compliance status of a product, being Sharia-based or Sharia compliance. Here is a very important point when it comes to the assessment. Being a Sharia compliance officer or a Sharia auditor or even Sharia board. So basically, will not be very concerned whether this one is Sharia-based or Sharia compliance, whether this is originated from Sharia or otherwise, but we look at the compliance requirement, whether this one complies with terms and conditions of a contract, if we map it against, for example, the sales. So whether this one is consistent with the requirements of the buyer, consistent with the Aqdul Bay, the pillars of the Bay, the terms and condition of the buyer, or not. Then we look at the other additional requirements within the policy of the bank, the policy of the central bank, and so on and so forth. So when it's come to the assessment, basically, so the bottom line is the compliance, regardless of whether this product is originated from Sharia, like Ijara, or it is imported from a different country. This is just showing some of the standards that has been issued by Central Bank of Malaysia. This is some of the standards that have been issued by IOFI, just to browse it, to show you there are some guidelines and standards locally and globally, whereby the Sharia board, the Sharia auditor, and the Sharia compliance will be guided basically to look at the product to ensure its compliance. This is some of the area of the risk that we should look at. We have to look at the structure of products, or services. You have to look at the term and the condition. Then you have to look at the implementation and the executions. And you have to be careful on two combination and the sequence of the execution to ensure that product is proper. And this is other lines of defense that look that the product is in compliance all the way. So we have a pre-compliance assessments in the board of directors and the Sharia board, and we have post-process Sharia compliance assessments, mainly in the Sharia review and the fourth line of defense, which is the Sharia audit. And this is overview of the contract. I think that's basically the overall key points I would like to highlight, and maybe we'll take it from there to accommodate some of the Q&A.
Sure.
Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Hassan, for these insightful presentation about a very important question that not just matters to the practitioners out there, but also to Islamic finance graduates and also consumers who actually consume these products and services offered by the Islamic financial institutions or any other type of Sharia compliance or Sharia-based company, right? So what we're going to do right now is move to the questions that we have received in the registration form. After that, we will go to the questions that you have right now in the presentation. You have two options to post your questions. Option number one, you have the Q&A button, which you can find in the Zoom application. And option number two, you can post your question directly in the chat box, and we will be addressing them after we cover the questions that we have received earlier. Right? So moving to the questions part. Right, so the first question is stating what is the current issues and challenges facing Sharia auditors in Malaysia Islamic banking industry?
Okay, Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Thank you very much. I try to be brief on the questions so we can take more questions and to avoid deep deliberation on each one. Where for the Sharia auditor, I think in Malaysia, that's my view anyway. All this basically answers reflecting my personal view. I might be right, I may be wrong. But in the context, I think, of the exercise of the Sharia auditor and the Sharia compliance officer, I found it less challenging compared to other jurisdictions. And the reason being is that Malaysia is a very highly regulated market. So you have the IFSA, which is an act. We have different other regulations and law, which basically create certainty in the practice. So you have a policy document of the central bank, which represents standards. So it makes even the Sharia board job a bit easy, job of the lawyers much easy, the Sharia auditor, Sharia compliance officer, and even in the policy document of the central bank, on the most relevant Sharia contract, they distinguish between the S, which is the standard, and the G, which is the guideline. So you know basically where you should comply and where is the flexibility that basically you make your call and adopt a different stand if you want. Then over and above that, you have the guidelines of the central bank. Over and above, you have the resolutions of the Sharia Advisory Council of Bank Negara. And lastly, you have the resolutions of the Sharia Committee. So what I'm trying to say is that the law regulations, because you see functions of the Sharia auditor, function of the Sharia auditor, I'm sorry to say that, but I always like to describe Sharia auditor this way, which is good. Is like basically acting like a robot in a way. So no feeling, basically you comply, tick, you don't comply, is a discrepancy. So no friends, kawan. So you comply, basically tick, you don't comply, basically you have to provide the evidence. And something like less evidence is basically kind of discrepancy and has to be reported to the board to make decision. So the point here is that when you are looking for the non-compliance, the issues and challenges of some of the Sharia auditor out there is they don't have like what's so-called checklist, very detailed checklist on the products and services offered. And if they have, it is very broad. So the space of guessing and basically is a big, then sometimes the Sharia auditor might be a little bit confusing. But in the context of Malaysia, as I mentioned, too much details and guidelines that basically make, in my view, the Sharia auditor job and function, the Sharia officer, much easy, because basically they can derive a checklist from the policy documents, from all these regulations, the 4 lines I mentioned, or the 5, including the Sharia board, easy basically to create your checklist and screen, of course, the product. This is one. The other thing basically is maybe the capacity sometimes of the Sharia board, the Sharia auditor, the capacity of the team is not that sufficient, whereby sometimes they leverage on the conventional group and do kind of integrated Sharia audit exercise. Sometimes lack of expertise in other area, like for example, takaful, ITs and so on and so forth. So the competency level may be a little bit less over this, which may represent what's so-called challenge in them. The size sometimes of the financial institutions. Sometimes the issue of outsourcing from third party, if you don't have sufficient what's so-called. Sometimes the issue of communications breakdown within the what's so-called financial institutions. So I will not question too much the competency because this is ongoing learning. But there are some issues and challenges. But to me, in the context of Malaysia, at least the way I see it, it's a bit less because of the details of the checklist that has been basically put together.
Yeah, definitely. All right. The second question is, I'm not comfortable with the idea that many Sharia-compliant investments allow 30% interest in the underlying company or REIT. What is the justification behind this, and are there any Sharia standards that completely prohibit interest in all aspects?
Yeah, actually, we know that interest basically is prohibited, no doubt about it. But here we are talking about a very complex market. Very complex markets where the interest is everywhere. Like the Prophet says, everyone will eat riba. If you don't eat riba, the dust of riba will touch you. So it's everywhere. And it's very complex. And if we impose zero tolerance on interest, basically we cannot do business. So we just operate in a very island. The capacity of the financial institution is very limited. Islamic finance itself is less than 5% globally. In some countries, they are starting. In some countries, basically, even Indonesia is a big country, but it's less than 5%. Malaysia is around 20 plus, 25. So some country, 1%, 2%, 3%. So imagine the dominant market is a conventional. So how to operate in this environment if you impose zero tolerance with what's so-called third party. So some flexibility and relaxation has been created, and some benchmarking have been basically introduced. Like for example, this screening stocks have been introduced, like gas capital, like Dow Jones, like security commissions, like IOFI and others providers, FTSE that has been used also by Bursa. So all these have been introduced to determine like the ratio of 5%, if there is 30%. In the past, if you can see, if you remember the resolution of the methodology of the Security Commission, it was used to be 25% and 20% and 10%, then 5%. Then because the market has been improved, the market has been strengthened, so the market becomes a little bit robust, so the bars of standard have been raised. Then they remove the 25, so they tie up the degree of tolerance to 20, then remove the 10, and they impose the 5. So as long the market may improve and the market share basically expand, so the rukhsa will diminish. Then the percentage will be tied up, and maybe we may reach to a 0% level. But if you impose that level, I think the market may not be operate. So it is based on a haja, it's based on a darura, and sometimes it is a temporary measurements while the market basically improve. In addition, that scholars basically allow the dealing with a person who's with a non-Muslim people, dealing, buying and trading with having even partners with a non-Muslim, despite his wealth acquisitions, could be through non-permissible income, buying and selling with a non-Muslim, even his what's so-called wealth could not be a Sharia compliant. So that kind of mix in trading, a partnership, despite your wealth could be acquired from non-permissible. This is a kind of market complexity, for the time being, and looking for improvement, inshallah.
Yeah, thanks. We're actually running short of time, so maybe we can answer that shortly.
Let me just,
Is there a possibility to shift totally from Sharia compliance to Sharia-based? Who and what needs to accommodate the change?
Yeah, this is, as I mentioned, I think we mentioned what is important. Even you have a Sharia-based, you need the Sharia compliance requirement. Even you have an Ijara, you have a Sharia compliance requirement. You have to comply with the policy document of the central bank. You have to comply with the act. You have to comply with the internal policy of the financial institution itself. You have to comply with the Sharia resolutions of the financial institutions. All these are compliance requirements that even the Sharia-based make it subject to some additional requirements. So it doesn't mean when you have a Sharia-based, you remove the compliance elements. Compliance still there. Even you have a Musharaka, there are compliance requirements. Even you have an Ijara, there are compliance requirements. Even you have Sharia-based, the Sharia-based contract can turn into no Sharia compliance if that Sharia-based breach some terms and conditions. So I don't think there is wants to shift here and there. But what we can say, maybe the questions, or maybe the people, when they talk about Sharia-based and Sharia compliance, what they want, maybe they want innovations more from Sharia-based products. Meaning we go back to our traditions, we go back to our treasures of books in Mu'amalat, and see what we can find for those Sharia-based in order to be introduced in the market in the form of product and services. That's maybe, and start maybe importing products from overseas or from a conventional space, make it into Sharia compliance. Possibly that's the question could be. But as long as the operation of the financial institutions, every product being Sharia-based or otherwise is subject to compliance requirements. Yeah.
Okay. On the basis of Darura, can those in locations with no Sharia-compliant institutions transact or invest with riba-based businesses?
Yeah, well, it's here, of course, the answer, there is a rukhsa and azima. Of course, the azima is, the answer is no, you cannot transact or riba-based. But if, let's say, there is a darura, so only the Sharia board that will look at the case, assess it, and based on that, they may say yes or no. If they say yes, normally they will put some measurements. The typical example here that we have is the takaful. Takaful capacity, for example, in Malaysia and other places as well, is very limited. So when you go to retakaful space is very limited. So most of the people, most of the financial takaful operators go to reinsurance. So reinsurance is conventional, but basically it is a practice based on darura. So they go there. Investment sometimes they may go to some bonds, government bonds, or some treasury bills, or some for liquidity purpose. So it could be yes, provided it has gone through proper discussion, proper assessment, and the Sharia board give their resolution based on that. And if it is based on darura, normally it would be measured and monitored.
Yeah, I think, Doctor, this question is slightly different in a way that it states, if I, for example, stay in a location that there's no Sharia-compliant institutions, can I deal with banks or institutions that are non-Sharia-compliant?
This one, always scholars allowed it in daruriyat items, so like, for example, mortgages. For example, if you want to buy a mortgage and you need it, or let's say you want to buy a car and the car is needed as let's say you're a taxi driver and it's a part of your core business. So basically, based on the darura, if the item is listed under darura, you can have it. Like scholars allowed buying houses through conventional mortgage if it is related to conventional finance, if it is related to mortgage, because mortgage is very essential. So it depends on what kind of facility you are looking and how it is listed as a darura in your portfolio. Based on that, it could be, and again, it is measured with some conditions, because darurat always has conditions to comply with. Yeah.
Okay, final question. What is the approach towards vague matters that we cannot identify Sharia compliance-wise? Do we constantly need to refer to scholars for all features and startups?
Yeah, the rules is everything is permissible. Everything is permissible unless it is proven otherwise. So always we assume contract, of course, if it is outside the ibadat, contract, transactions, innovations, everything is permissible. Unless it is proven otherwise. So if it is clearly permissible, you just carry on. If you have doubtness or you start to trade off whether it is permissible or not, I think it's better to clear your doubt or if it is, as you mentioned, a vague matter. So maybe you refer to the Sharia scholars or someone who is knowledgeable, at least to make sure that you are on the right direction. Just give an example. If you just have doubters or some investment, then you put your money and invest a lot. And after, 1 year, 2 years of investment, you discover after discussion, it is not Sharia compliant. So you become a very delicate situations. What's the way out and how to exit, and what's the status of your money that has been accumulated. But the problem could be solved if you ask in the first place. Wallahu a'lam.
Thanks, Doctor. Before moving on to the questions live from the audience, we will be sharing these slides with everyone who is present and who have registered for the webinar. At the same time, we will be having the link of the video recording of this webinar shared with the attendees as well. So let's go to the questions that we have received from the audience online. There is one question. Stop sharing. Okay, the question is, the Sheikh mentioned that a product can be Sharia compliant in Bank A, but not in Bank B. Does he think that this is healthy for the reputation and the success of the industry in the long run, since a customer can just choose to go to Bank A and avoid Bank B?
Well, this is, yeah, it's an issue, but the problem, this is a phenomenon. This one cannot be stopped. That's number one. We are dealing with the fact here. The Aisha radiallahu anha, the wife of the Prophet, has different view from other companions. Ibn Umar, one of the companions, has different view than Ibn Mas'ud, the other companions. The fourth school of law, they are competent, knowledgeable, well respected by the Ummah, and they have different opinions. School of thought demonstrate this phenomena. So the issue here, I'm not encouraging this. I'm highlighting a phenomena that exists in the Sharia because there are reasons for diversity, reasons which are acknowledged by Sharia. What's so called that basically put diversity as a fact. So if it is a fact, so that's how it is translated in the decision of the Sharia board leading financial institutions. So you may have, yes, Bank A different from A, from different B, B from Z, that's the fact, and that's why, as I mentioned, there is a process of harmonization, there is a process of standardization. For example, in Malaysia, if you look at it as a country, so there is a policy document that has been issued by the central bank that puts standardizations in the market and creates consistency in the legal documentation, product and services, consistency in the Sharia compliance functions, Sharia audit functions, Sharia board decisions. So this is a good, what I'm saying, it's a fact, phenomena, but how to improve, how to narrow the gap, how to close the gap, how to create consistency, this is the effort of everyone. And IOFI as well is doing a good job in putting Sharia standards at the global level, accounting standard and auditing standards, the IFSB putting also guidelines, the IFM, the International Financial Market, putting standard in the financial market. So there are financial institutions, the International Fiqh Academy putting resolutions. So all these institutions are trying to basically put a global standards in order to create what's called standardization in the practice. But you cannot deny the fact that diversity exists. So we have to deal with it in a wise manner. Right?
Yeah, all right. As a follow-up, do you think the regulators need to take decisive decisions in this about compliance?
Yeah, you see, sometimes it's difficult at the high level. Yes, this is why policy documents, even or IOFI standards, it's a high level. But when you come to a very complex case, very customized, and not very clear, and even within, I'm not saying Bank A is different from Bank B only. We have cases that I have experienced myself, that in the Sharia, the same Sharia board, you have different views. Then sometimes they go with the chairman, sometimes they go against the chairman, sometimes they go 50-50. That when the issue is debated strongly and sometimes the case is postponed for a few sessions, they have to do the decision by majority. And we have to move on. So basically, this one is a very challenging, yes, and sometimes very complex case, is not very straightforward. If it's very straightforward, I think everyone will agree on the issue, but because it's very complex and it has a different issue, so everyone will tackle it from a different angle, so we may end up in a scenario of diversity. So everyone will express his view. At the end of the day, we go by majority.
See,
Yeah.
we will take one final question, and then we are out of time. How does Sharia governance policy that is recently revised different than Sharia governance framework? Does this revision improve Sharia auditors' box-ticking practices?
Yeah.
I think this is specific to the Malaysian
How
context.
does governance policy? That's exactly. Yeah, the new one has been revised. Well, it's increased. It's an improvement. Yes, it's an improvement, but no significant impact on the previous one. I think among them maybe the Sharia governance tenures of the Sharia board has been spelled out clearly to be 9 years, meaning the Sharia board, they cannot serve more than 9 years, so they have to step down after 9 years. There are some what's so-called, as you know, this is the third cycle. This is the third revisions after the GPS Guideline 1 and the Sharia Governance 2010. So this is the new one, which is going to enforce in April 2020. It's an improvement, yes, but I don't think it has a significant impact on the Sharia auditor. It's more on the overall Sharia governance improvement from all angles. Yeah.
See. Okay. Thanks a lot, Doctor. Thank you to those who have attended. Just a quick recap. We will be sending these slides and sharing it with the attendees. And also we will have the video shared with all those who attended. Thank you so much, Dr. Hassan, for these for sharing the knowledge with us. And thank you to our attendees. And we hope to see you on the last Wednesday of December for another insightful session with a new speaker, inshallah. Thanks a lot and have a great day or evening, depending on where you are. Assalamu alaikum.